Welcome to Whispers of Hope, where the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. Today, we bring you the story of Betty, a girl whose light was nearly dimmed by blindness, but who found her way to strength, dignity, and love. Betty wasn't born blind. In fact, when she came into the world, her mother said her eyes shone so bright, it felt like holding a handful of starlight. She was a beautiful baby, soft curls, round cheeks, eyes that always seemed to search for something lovely. From the moment she could hold a doll, she fell in love with pretty things. Tiny plastic tiaras, bright pink gowns, sparkly ribbons. She would sit for hours dressing up her dolls, smoothing their tiny dresses, brushing their hair with her small, careful hands. When they were ready, she'd line them up like little queens on a stage only she could see. Then she'd stand tall, lift her chin just so, and tell anyone who would listen. One day, I'll be a model. I'll wear the most beautiful dresses, walk down the biggest runway. People will clap for me. They'll say, look at her, she's like a princess. She loved hearing people laugh when she strutted through the house in her mother's oversized shoes, a scarf tied like a royal cape around her tiny shoulders. Family, neighbors, even strangers at the shop, they adored her. She was sunshine wrapped in lace. A child with big dreams, and eyes that sparkled like tomorrow. But when Betty turned 5, something shifted, like a light in her world flickering, then fading. It began with a fever that wouldn't break. An infection that stole her laughter and left her small body lying limp under thin hospital sheets. Nurses came and went. Her mother sat by her side every night, whispering prayers over Betty's tiny, trembling hands. When she finally came home, she was so weak her father carried her everywhere, his strong arms cradling the once bouncy little girl who used to twirl and pose in oversized shoes. Then, before they could breathe relief, measles struck. More days in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and medicine. More nights her mother barely slept, listening for the soft rise and fall of Betty's breath. When she came home again, her mother noticed it first. Betty would bump into chairs that had always been in the same place. She squinted at the dolls she used to dress. She asked, Mama, why is it dark, even when the sun was high and bright? The doctors spoke in soft voices. Her father spent hours in waiting rooms, fingers pressed together in silent, desperate prayer. They ran more tests, gave more medicine. But nothing worked. Piece by piece, the world Betty had once arranged so beautifully, the colors, the dresses, the dolls lined up like little princesses, faded into a shadow she could not chase away. When they told her she would never see again, she didn't scream. She just turned her face to the wall and wept until her chest hurt. She stopped playing dress-up. She didn't want to feel the doll's tiny shoes in her hands. Didn't want to pretend to be a princess anymore. Bit by bit, the bright little girl everyone adored, went quiet. She sat alone, listening to the world she could no longer see, and wondered why it had left her behind. When it was time for Betty to start school, her mother sat awake many nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering where. How? Who will help her now? The neighborhood school just down the dusty road wouldn't take her. There were no teachers for the blind, no braille books, no idea what to do with a little girl who couldn't see the chalkboard or the playground games. So, her father, who built wooden chairs and tables in a small shed behind their house, put aside every extra coin, every spare moment, to search for a place that would accept his daughter. When they finally found a special school for blind children, it was miles away. Too far to walk. Only the public bus would get them there. Each morning, before dawn painted the sky, Betty's father would lift her onto his bicycle's back seat and pedal to the bus stop. He would hold her hand tight as they squeezed onto crowded buses, the smell of fuel and dust swirling around them. Betty would sit quietly, head pressed to his shoulder, listening to the city rumble past, a world she could only feel now in vibrations and echoes. At the end of each school day, her father came back, tired from the workshop, his hands rough and smelling of sawdust, to bring her home again. Sometimes he fell asleep on the bus beside her, head bobbing as the engine rattled beneath them. It was exhausting. And expensive. Her mother did what she could, selling tomatoes, onions, and dried fish from a small table in front of their house. She counted each coin carefully, measuring what they could eat against what must be saved for tomorrow's bus fare, for Betty's school fees, for fabric for new uniforms. Betty was the fourth of 5 children, squeezed between an older brother who liked to read to her at night, and a younger sister who still didn't understand why Betty couldn't see her smile. Her brothers and sisters tried to help, guiding her around the tiny house so she wouldn't bump her knees on the furniture, helping her find her slippers when she misplaced them, describing what they saw outside so Betty could picture it in her mind. But the world felt different now. Every step was uncertain. Every room seemed bigger and colder without the bright light she once carried with her everywhere. The new school felt strange at first, a place filled with soft tapping sounds of fingers brushing across raised dots, the squeak of canes against concrete floors, the quiet voices of children who understood darkness better than daylight. Betty was nervous that first day. She sat on a wooden bench beside her father, clutching the small bag her mother had packed. Inside it were her new notebooks, though she could no longer see their neat covers, and a lunch wrapped in old newspaper. At first, Betty kept her head down. But then she heard them, other children laughing. Not at her, but with each other. Some had never seen the sun rise, never knew what red or green looked like. And yet they laughed, about silly teachers, secret jokes, and the tapping sounds their canes made when they played tag in the courtyard. Slowly, Betty realized she wasn't the only one who had lost something. She wasn't alone anymore. A girl named Rose sat with her during lunch one afternoon. She pressed Betty's hand into her own small palm and traced letters into it, friend. Another boy, Musa, showed her how to read Braille by guiding her fingers gently over the tiny dots. At first, Betty wept in frustration, her hands clumsy, the dots confusing. But each day, she learned. She found a new way to see with her fingertips. There were moments she still missed her dolls and the bright dresses, but now she had new dreams. She would run her fingers over pages filled with raised words, spelling her name over and over until it felt like hers again. Time flew by and soon she was preparing to write the final exams to go to secondary school. When she finished primary school, she surprised everyone, except maybe her mother, who had always said, "Betty, you have eyes in your heart." She sat for the entrance exams with the other children, Braille sheets under her fingers, head bent in quiet determination. When the results came, her father lifted her into his arms and spun her in a slow circle on the dusty road outside their home. She had passed with high marks, so high that she earned a place in a secondary school. A regular one. Far away from home. Far away from the soft safety of other blind children, but closer, maybe, to the bigger world she still dreamed of touching somehow. When the day came for Betty to leave home again, this time farther than ever before, a hush settled over their little house. She could feel it in the way her mother lingered over packing her clothes, folding each piece twice, then smoothing it flat with trembling hands. Her siblings sat around her on the mat, passing her the soap, the toothbrush, her notebooks, one by one, like they were giving her tiny pieces of their hearts to carry with her. The night before, they ate dinner together, plates balanced on their knees under the soft glow of the single bulb. Her father cleared his throat 3 times before he could say, "Betty, remember, darkness is not the end. Sometimes it's the beginning." Then they prayed, her mother's voice cracking on the words, asking God to watch over her daughter's steps, even the ones she could not see. At dawn, her father lifted her box onto the back of a rickety bike that carried them to the bus station. On the bus, she sat pressed close to him, listening to the hum of the road, the chatter of strangers, the conductor's sharp voice calling out towns she could only imagine in her mind. When they finally reached the school gates, Betty's legs felt like they might buckle, though she could not see the walls that rose before her. The hostel administrator, Mr. Adu, spoke gently, though she could hear the busyness in his footsteps as he led them down narrow corridors. Miss Rose, the hostel mistress, smelled faintly of talcum powder and warm fabric. She squeezed Betty's hand and whispered, "You are safe here, my dear. We will take care of you." When her father placed her hand back in Miss Rose's, Betty didn't cry, but her throat burned with the goodbye she could not say out loud. She felt the shape of her father's shoulders as he hugged her one last time, the rough stubble of his cheek against her forehead. Then his footsteps faded down the hall, and she was alone. Miss Rose led her into the dormitory, the air filled with the soft rustle of uniforms, giggles, whispered secrets that floated above bunk beds. An older girl, Mary, spoke first, her voice bright and certain. "Don't worry, you're my bedside mate now. I'll help you." She held Betty's elbow as they found her bed, right next to Mary's own. She helped her unpack her clothes, showed her where to keep her soap and bucket, where the light switch was, though Betty could not see it anymore. The next morning, Betty rose before dawn, listening to the flurry of girls getting ready, the squeak of bed springs, the splash of water in metal buckets, the soft music of laughter and teenage chatter. Mary helped her get to the bathroom and back and supported her as she got ready on this first day in school in the new environment. In class, she sat at the front, her cane folded beside her chair. She kept her head down, tracing her notebook with careful fingers. A few classmates leaned close to whisper her name, offer to read things aloud, guide her to the cafeteria line. Every night, when the hostel fell quiet, she lay under her thin blanket and listened to the wind outside, trying to picture her mother cooking dinner, her father's saw humming in the shed, her siblings laughing in the yard. She missed them so much it ached, but each morning she rose, pressed her fingers to the pages of her Braille notes, and promised herself she would make them proud. The new school's resource center became Betty's second home, a small, warm room with rows of Braille books, the hum of old computers, and the constant, comforting tap-tap-tap of fingers learning to see with touch and sound instead of eyes. At first, the strange bumps and dots frustrated her. Her fingers felt clumsy and slow. She often sat alone after lessons, learning to use the computer, doing the same task over and over until they made sense. Sometimes she wanted to give up, to stop practicing and let the darkness swallow her dreams for good. But then Mary would sit beside her, guiding her hand gently back to the page. Or a kind teacher would kneel and remind her, "Betty, you've already seen the world once, now you must learn to see it a new way." And she did. Slowly, she began to master the use of the keys on the computer. Her fingers learned to dance over the keys. She already knew how to read her Braille, and the dots became words, the words became books, the books became new dreams. The new knowledge of using the computer excited her. Whenever she was on the computer, Betty felt her heart spark in a way she hadn't felt since she dressed her dolls in tiny gowns. The screen was black, but the voice from the screen reader spoke to her like an old friend, guiding her through emails, messages, even the endless world of the internet she couldn't see but could now touch with keys and commands. When the term ended, Betty went home on the same long bus ride with her father. She dozed with her head against the window, dreaming not of runways but of words and voices that could travel farther than sight ever could. When she stepped off the bus, her siblings squealed and ran to her. They hugged her so tightly she almost lost her balance. Her mother held her face in her hands, tracing her cheeks with careful fingers as though seeing her with a mother's eyes that never needed light. "You've grown so tall, Betty. My beautiful girl." Betty laughed. She hadn't heard that word, beautiful, in so long. One afternoon, her mother left her phone on the table. Betty picked it up, turned on the accessibility feature, and began tapping away, sending a text, then searching for recipes, then giggling at the look of pure astonishment on her brothers' faces. Her father chuckled. "So you can see more than we can now, eh?" he teased. She smiled. In a way, it was true. When the holidays ended, Betty packed her things with less fear in her heart. She knew what waited for her, her Braille books, the tapping keys, the soft laughter in the hostel at night. Most of all, she knew she wasn't alone. Beezy and Jane, her closest friends, were waiting too. The three girls often sat together under a tree near the classroom block, talking in soft voices about life's secrets. Would they ever get married? Would someone ever love them, someone who wouldn't see their blindness first? They wondered about jobs, about cities they'd never seen, about who they could become. And every time Betty spoke, she felt something stir in her chest, an idea bigger than her old dream of glittering dresses and bright lights. She didn't need a runway anymore. She wanted a microphone. A stage where her words could walk where her eyes could not, reminding anyone like her that their dreams were not dead things buried in darkness. She would tell them, circumstances can change. Dreams can live. You can still move forward. Betty's final year of secondary school felt like the edge of a cliff and the beginning of a sky. She sat for her final exams, her fingers flying across Braille pages late into the night while her roommates whispered encouragements in the darkness. When the results came, her father read them aloud at home, his voice catching on the high marks, his rough carpenter's hands resting on her shoulder as if to steady his pride. Her mother wept into her wrapper. Her siblings boasted to the neighbors, "Betty's going to university." As if they were the ones boarding the bus themselves. When she received her admission to study psychology, Betty felt a quiet surge in her chest. Psychology, the study of the mind, the unseen worlds inside people, it felt right somehow, like naming her own journey. University was another test. Campus was big and bustling, crowds, cars, laughter that moved in waves Betty couldn't see but felt brush past her like the wind. Here, no one paused to guide her unless she asked. So she learned to ask. She learned to stretch her cane before her like a second pair of eyes. She mapped lecture halls and cafeterias in her mind, counting steps and turns like whispered prayers for freedom. Some days, loneliness wrapped around her like her old childhood darkness. But little by little, new voices entered, classmates who read notes to her, friends who shared their meals, a girl in the hostel who taught her how to buy food online. In the evenings, after classes, Betty would return to her small corner in the hostel and open her laptop. She'd listen to the soft voice of her screen reader, tapping out stories about her day, about fear, about small victories, about what it meant to live inside darkness yet still carry light. People read her words. They sent messages back, "You made me cry. You made me brave. You made me believe again." Sometimes she earned a small payment for an article, not much, but enough to buy data, to keep her voice traveling where her eyes could not. When graduation came, her family gathered again, wide grins and teary eyes as her father called her our graduate psychologist. Her mother pressed her forehead to Betty's and whispered, "You are more than I dreamed, my daughter." Soon after, Betty's old secondary school called. They had heard about her writing, her degree, her growing voice. They offered her a place to manage the resource center that had once opened her world. She said yes without thinking twice. It was a chance to stand at the same old desks where she once sat crying in frustration, now guiding small hands like hers, whispering, "Keep reading. Keep learning. You are not alone." Her family celebrated her job offer. They laughed about how much she had done, how much more she would do. But in quiet moments, her mother's sigh betrayed her worry. "Will you find someone who truly sees you, Betty?" Betty never told her about the proposals, the men who promised they didn't mind her blindness but whose pity clung to their words like a sour aftertaste. Except Mark. Mark, who kept showing up, with books, with flowers, with stubborn faith that she was more than something to be pitied. Betty did not say yes yet. She kept the door closed, guarding her heart like a precious stone she refused to hand over out of loneliness. She had built her life from the shadows, and she would make sure any man who stepped inside it knew how to stand in the dark with her, unafraid. Mark was gentle, but relentless, the kind of steady voice that knocks softly on a closed door until the person inside finally believes they're worthy of being chosen, not pitied. When Betty kept turning him away, he didn't argue or beg. He just stayed. He brought her small gifts, books in Braille, audio stories he knew she'd like, new ideas for her blog. He told Jane, "Help me make her see I don't just want to rescue her. I want to stand beside her." One afternoon, Jane sat with Betty under their favorite tree near the resource center and asked the question she'd been carrying for months. "Betty, why do you keep saying no to him?" Betty turned her face to where Jane's voice came from. She let the silence stretch until she found the words. "Jane, I'm blind. I don't want a husband who sees me as a burden, or a woman he's doing a favor by marrying. I don't want Mark to fight battles he's not ready for," whispers from people who think he settled for less. "I don't want to walk into a family who will smile to my face but mourn behind my back. I'd rather stand alone than be pitied in someone's house." She told Jane she'd only even consider Mark's proposal if he could convince his family first, fully, honestly, with no secrets or shame. When Jane carried Betty's words back to him, Mark didn't flinch. He asked to speak to Betty himself. He sat across from her in the small school office, the light falling across her folded hands. "I've told them everything, Betty," he said softly. "About you. About your blindness. About your stubborn heart that wants to run even without eyes. And they love you already. They want you, the same way I do, whole, unhidden. No one's pitying you, Betty. They see you. I see you. Betty wanted to believe him, but old fears die slow. She tested him. She watched him. And when he asked to meet her parents, she introduced him as her friend. Mark came often, helping her father fix a broken cabinet, carrying fresh tomatoes for her mother's shop, listening to her siblings' endless chatter. He planted himself in their home like a promise that refused to be uprooted. One evening, Betty's parents sat her down in the quiet of their small living room. Her father cleared his throat. "Betty, do you want this? We think he truly loves you. Maybe let him love you." Betty breathed out all the doubt she'd been holding for years. She said yes, not to Mark alone, but to the possibility that love could look her straight in the eyes she could no longer open and still see a woman worthy of being chosen. Mark's family came with open arms and warm hands that held hers without hesitation. They brought gifts wrapped in fine cloths, laughter that filled the house, and gentle reassurance that there was no room for pity at this table. The wedding was everything Betty never dared dream of when she first lost her sight: bright music, joyful tears, a mother's dance with her daughter in borrowed light. Mark spared no expense, but more than that, he spared no effort to make sure Betty felt seen every step of the way, not led, but partnered. Their honeymoon was a testament to all she'd once thought she'd lost: the soft breeze of Paris she could feel on her skin, the laughter of safari guides describing lions she couldn't see but could picture through their words. Mark described sunsets in colors she hadn't known since childhood, painting the world for her with the brush of his voice. 3 years later, Betty holds their 1-year-old daughter, Maya, a giggling bundle of life that clings to her neck and listens when she sings the same lullabies that once soothed her own dark nights. Betty still stands on stages and sits behind microphones, telling her story, not as a woman pitied, but as a woman seen, respected, and deeply loved. She always begins the same way. "I didn't want pity. I just wanted to be seen." And now, she is. Fully. Truly. And never again, pitied. Thank you for listening to Betty's story, a whisper of hope that reminds us no dream has to die in the dark. If her courage touched you today, please share this story with someone who needs a light for their own path. And if you'd like more real, hope-filled stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and join our family here at Whispers of Hope. See you in the next story. Keep believing.